Oh, hey Bot 20s, I'm back again for another lesson. I'll just set my coffee aside here. We are going to talk today about the 3 processes involved in urine formation, and we're actually going to talk about why things like coffee and tea make you go to the bathroom more often. So the 3 processes involved in urine formation are filtration, reabsorption, and secretion. So if you take a look at our nephron from last lesson, we know that blood's going in through the afferent arteriole, being filtered by the glomerulus, and then being carried out through the efferent arteriole. We then have the Bowman's capsule that'll be collecting all that filtrate, taking it through the proximal tubule, down the loop of Henle into the medulla, up the loop of Henle, into the distal tubule, and then into these collecting ducts here. So the very first process we call filtration. This is the movement of things that are smaller, like glucose and water and sodium and different ions, urea. They're going to move out of the blood, out of the high pressure glomerulus into the lower pressure area. Now, the glomerulus is a very high pressure capillary. It's about 65 millimeters of mercury versus a regular capillary, which is about 25. So how this works is things like fluids and ions, they always want to move from areas of high pressure to areas of low pressure. So here are some things that you'll find in the glomerulus and then in the Bowman's capsule. This means they're getting filtered, so they'll be found in the filtrate. So water, yes, water will be filtered. So water will end up in your Bowman's capsule. Sodium chloride, so salt, yes. Glucose, yes. Amino acids, yes. Hydrogen, yes. Our urea, absolutely. But then you're gonna notice things like plasma proteins, red blood cells, platelets, even white blood cells. They're all found in the blood. Yes, they're found in the glomerulus, but they're not found in the filtrate. They're too large and they stay in your blood. If you do end up finding things like red blood cells in your blood, it could mean that something is going on with your kidneys. The next step in this process is called reabsorption. So all that stuff we just filtered, we're actually going to absorb most of it, way back, right back into our capillaries. Now the reason we do this is because if we didn't do this, so if we didn't do this reabsorption process, you would have to drink 1 liter of liquid every 10 minutes or you would run out of water. Now, I don't know anyone who's pounding back a liter of water every 10 minutes. That would be a horrible thing to have to do. So thankfully what happens is we just do a big filter, we take a bunch of stuff out, and then we're putting like 99% of it back into our blood. So we're reabsorbing water and glucose and salt and all that good stuff. Basically for every 120 milliliters of fluid filtered, only 1 milliliter turns into urine. So 1 out of every 120. The rest is reabsorbed back into that capillary. Because if we go back to our nephron here, just remember that the capillary is completely surrounding this proximal tubule and all the other parts of the nephron. So most reabsorption is going to occur in that proximal tubule. And in that proximal tubule, we're going to have things like, once again, glucose and sodium and water being reabsorbed. Then the fluid is going to go down what's called the loop of Henle, where we're going to take out, right? We're going to take out a lot of water. It's going to make this area super, super salty down here. And then as we go up, we're going to take out a lot of sodium. So we're going to take out water and sodium as we're going up and down our loop of Henle, and then we're going to go into the distal tubule, where we're going to produce these 2 hormones. Now these 2 hormones, they're not made in this area, but they do affect this area. They're called aldosterone and they're called ADH, also known as the antidiuretic hormone. Sometimes our ion balances get a little off, so our body has to be like, hey, we need some more salt, we need some more ions, so we're going to make aldosterone. What aldosterone is going to do is it's going to maintain your ion balance by making sure that in your distal tubule and your collecting duct, we're reabsorbing a little extra salt, maybe a little extra chlorine, maybe some more ions, some potassium to maintain that ion balance. And if we're low on water, like let's say we're dehydrated, we're going to make something called ADH, which is the antidiuretic hormone. It's going to do the same thing, but make water be more reabsorbed by the body. So what you're going to do is you're going to make the ADH, it's going to go to the distal tubule, it's going to go to the collecting duct, and tell that, hey, we need to reabsorb more water. Now I said, how does this influence things like coffee and tea and alcohol and things like that? So those types of drinks are called diuretics. If If you drink a lot of coffee, you drink a lot of tea, you drink a lot of alcohol, what happens is that product, that liquid, will actually block your ADH, and you do end up losing a lot of water, going to the bathroom quite often because you're not holding on to that water as much because it blocks the production of ADH. So diuretics actually make you go to the bathroom more, in turn dehydrating you more because you're ending up losing all that extra water that normally you'd be hanging on to. Okay, now when we talk about movement of things in the nephron, it always just comes down to, is it active transport, is it passive transport? Good way to differentiate is, are you using energy or not? If you're using energy, it's active transport. If you're not using energy, it's passive, like things like diffusion and osmosis. So we take things like sodium ions. We might have to move them out with a little bit of energy, so that's an example of active transport. When we move the sodium out, since it's positively charged, negatively charged things like chlorine and bicarbonate will probably follow with it. So we don't really have to do anything there. It'll just be attracted to those positive ions. Things like glucose and amino acids, they also might have to be moved through active transport, so putting them back into the blood, right? Now, other things like water can be moved passively through osmosis. Also, water has kind of an interesting relationship with the ion concentrations, because generally what happens is, if you have a certain concentration, like let's say you have, let's say you have a bunch of salt in your filtrate, and you take some of the salt out, then you're now left with a bunch of water, and now the pressure has changed, the concentration has changed, so now water usually will follow the ions as well, passively. And then we do have this kind of weird thing happening here, which is we call it urea cycling. It's kind of weird, but we actually put a little bit of urea and uric acid back into the blood, and you're probably like, why would we even do that? That's waste. Well, the reason is we want to keep those concentrations at certain levels. So the good news is, even though we put it back into our blood, it's actually going to end up back in the kidneys later on in the cycle. So we call it urea cycling. We actually put a little bit back into the blood just so we can put it back into the kidney. It just means that optimal concentration. Okay, and then our very last step here is secretion. So secretion is at the very end here in the distal tubule and the collecting duct. If we have some things that, we still have in our blood that we need to get rid of, this could be like, excess ammonia, urea, hydrogen ions, maybe we have too much water, maybe we have too much potassium or magnesium or who knows what, we will actually secrete it from the blood into our distal tubule. So that's the very last step in urine formation. Okay, so to tie everything together, so we're going to tie all this together, we're going to have our filtration happening here. This is your Bowman's capsule and your glomerulus. Filter, 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 things like water, sugar, glucose, amino acids, ions, they're going into the Bowman's capsule. Then we go through the proximal tubule. The reason it's all kind of like twisted, like a water slide, is to allow more time for reabsorption. So then we're going to take out a lot of what we just filtered, so water and nutrients and sodium and chlorine. We'll do a little bit of secretion there, but not much. It's mostly reabsorption there. Then as we go down the loop, we're taking out water. So as we go down the loop, we're taking out water. What this does is essentially makes the concentration of urine very, very salty. And then as we go into the medulla, we get even saltier. And now as we go up the loop or out of the medulla, we're going to take out more salt. So there's some more reabsorption of water down the loop, reabsorption of salt up the loop, and then into the distal tubule. In the distal tubule, this is where we're going to do a little bit more reabsorption as well as secretion. So we might secrete things like urea, maybe a little bit of ammonia, maybe some other waste products. Hydrogen's a big one actually. It helps maintain your body's pH balance. Your blood has a slightly basic pH, and that's because we will absorb, We'll absorb the bicarbonate ions, making it kind of basic. If our blood gets too acidic, we'll actually put the H+ into the urine. So it actually will kind of balance out the pH there. So it's kind of nice that our kidneys are also able to balance our blood's pH for us. Then, we're not done yet. We're going to have multiple distal tubules connect to this collecting duct here. So multiple tubules collect to the collecting duct. Take out maybe a little bit more salt, maybe a little bit more water, and then down the collecting duct into the renal pelvis where we're going through the ureter. It is officially urine now. and then into the bladder, and then out the urethra. So that's essentially the formation of urine and how that works. Now, what I want to end here is what happens if your kidneys aren't functioning properly? So what happens if your kidneys aren't doing their job properly? So one disorder that can impact your kidneys is diabetes mellitus. This is diabetes, like when you hear of like type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, they mean diabetes mellitus. It means you have too much glucose in your blood. Your insulin, which comes from your pancreas, is not doing its job and pulling the glucose into your cells for cell respiration. So because of that, you have a bunch of glucose in your blood. Well, eventually that blood's gonna end up in your kidneys. That extra glucose is then gonna end up in your nephron, in your urine. And this can actually be a problem because the extra glucose can change the water pressure and can actually influence your fluid levels and ion levels. People with diabetes mellitus, like when they do like a urine test, you're gonna find a ton of extra glucose in their urine, and they're actually gonna end up losing a lot of water as well. So that's another symptom of diabetes mellitus, is actually water loss and dehydration. There's also another type of diabetes that is not linked to sugar actually. It's actually linked to ADH, the hormone we just talked about. This is called diabetes insipidus. What happens is the ADH comes from your pituitary gland, which is up in your brain. But if you have diabetes insipidus, you actually make less ADH, or your ADH doesn't function as it should. Because of this, you are losing a tremendous amount of water. You are losing, believe it or not, anywhere from 4 to 8 liters of water a day. So to put that in perspective, right? If you take, 8 liters of water, that's 4 2-liter bottles of pop filled with urine a day. Like, that's how much water you're losing. Like, that's a crazy amount of water. You're always thirsty. You're constantly dehydrated. Now, the good news is, right, there's medication for both. So, for example, mellitus, there's things like, you can take your artificial insulin. There's a lot of different medications out there. You can help manage your diabetes. Diet and exercise can help. And then with insipidus, there's also medication you can take for this as well. So you're not losing as much water. Another issue you can have with your kidneys is nephritis. This is where, here's our normal kidney, and this is an inflamed kidney. Our nephrons actually become inflamed. Because of this, the pressure changes, and some of those bigger molecules can actually get into the nephron. This is where we find things like maybe a little bit of blood and red blood cells in your urine. That's maybe an indication, ooh, something's off with your kidney. You may have inflamed nephrons or nephritis. And then a really common one would be kidney stones. So a lot of people think kidney stones, right? Okay, you drink too much milk, they give you kidney stones. Not necessarily. Like, sometimes kidney stones can come from calcium, yes, but they can also come from uric acid buildup. They can come from urea buildup. There's a lot of things that can calcify or solidify in your kidneys. And sometimes it's just genetic. Like, honestly, it's nothing you did wrong. You just are more likely to develop kidney stones than others. Here's the nasty bit of kidney stones. They develop in the renal pelvis, okay? They are going to sit there until they are passed. And the only way to get rid of a kidney stone is to push it down the ureter, through your bladder, out the urethra. It's a little tiny jagged rock, comes out your urethra. It's not very fun. It is very, very painful. Now, the good news is, though, is if you are constantly getting kidney stones, if this is like a chronic genetic condition, you can actually get different treatments, like they'll blast them with shock waves to make them smaller, easier to be passed, or they might actually go in and surgically remove them if they're really, really big and can do some damage there. Now, these are all problems that can happen with your kidney, but the biggest issue that can go down with your kidney is if it doesn't work properly. Now, thankfully, you have 2 of them, right? You have 2 kidneys. But if one of those kidneys stops functioning, you now only have 1 working kidney. If both kidneys stop functioning, you need a way to clean your blood, and that's where dialysis comes in. So there's 2 different types of dialysis. These are both types where you'd go in, you would clean your blood using an artificial method because your kidneys are no longer able to do that. Hemodialysis is using a kind of machine to mimic your circulatory system. It's like an artificial kidney, whereas peritoneal dialysis is using a bit of diffusion and waste movement out of your body. Both methods work. Generally speaking, hemo would be the more preferred method. It's a little bit more effective, although it's not very accommodating because it's quite time consuming. So if you're doing hemodialysis, they're gonna put a port into your artery in your vein, right? They're gonna connect this machine to your artery in your vein, and then they're gonna use this machine to clean your blood. Now, you can't move, so you're sitting in a chair, you're there for a few hours, a few times a week, right? So you're 3-4 times a week, 3-4 hours a day, pumping that blood, cleaning your blood. So it's a really time-consuming process. Also, you don't feel very good because once again, while you're still able to clean your blood, you're not doing it as frequently as, say, someone with healthy kidneys would. With peritoneal, you can at least move around, so that's kind of nice. So you'll have a dialysis solution. It's actually pumped into your abdomen, and you actually use your abdominal wall as kind of like a filter. So it'll actually suck up all the waste and things like that might be in your blood, and then go through another tube into a little drainage bag. So the one advantage here is that you can actually move around a little bit, but it's not as efficient as your hemodialysis. That being said though, the very best thing that you can do, yes, dialysis will help for a little bit, but the very best thing that will ultimately help you is a kidney transplant. Generally, these are very successful because they find a matching donor that's the same blood type. You go on anti-rejection medications. You're very careful about that to make sure that your body accepts the new organ. And then what happens here is you have the two, let's say, you have the two kidneys that are not working. So you have the two kidneys that are not working. They're actually, believe it or not, going to leave those two kidneys in there because it's unnecessary to go in and remove those two kidneys and cause further damage. They're actually just going to leave them in there. So these two kidneys, right, they're not working, right? They're not doing their thing, but as long as they're not like infected or really hurting you, they're going to leave those in there. What they're going to do is they're going to go into someone who is donating their kidney. They're going to remove their kidney. Now, once again, they're still going to have a healthy kidney. They're going to remove their kidney. They're going to make an incision in your abdomen. They're actually going to put a kidney in your abdomen. Then what you're going to do is attach an artery and a vein to that transplanted kidney, and then attach a ureter, and then it's cleaning, it's filtering, it's making urine, and away we go. So there's a really cool project out there where people can actually, like, if you want to donate a kidney, but the person you want to donate to, you're not a match for, like blood type wise, you can actually go into this program where in Canada, they'll actually find a match for you and then find a match for your person, and they'll actually like donate kidneys that way. So it's pretty cool. If this kidney were to fail, they might actually leave this one in there as well. So it is possible you end up having 4 kidneys because you have the 2 ones that don't work, your transplanted one that unfortunately sometimes the transplant doesn't work. Your immune system is like, I don't like this isn't me, so it might attack it. So you might have to do a second transplant, which would be a 4th kidney here, and hopefully that one ends up working. Okay, so that's it for the excretory system, and that's actually it for human systems. So now we're going to move on to the ecology side of biology, where we're going to look at things like ecosystems, food chains, and cycles of matter. So thanks again for watching, and we'll chat soon.